The twin moons of Zereth Prime hung low over the endless dunes, casting long shadows across the merchant convoy that had stopped for the night. Captain Marcus Webb stood on top of his armored transport vehicle and scanned the horizon with his thermal binoculars. The desert stretched in every direction, a sea of golden sand that turned silver under the moonlight. His convoy of 12 vehicles carried valuable medical supplies bound for the colony of New Damascus, 300 kilometers to the east. Marcus was a veteran merchant captain who had spent 15 years running supply routes across the most dangerous worlds in the outer colonies. He had seen many things in his time, but the deserts of Zereth Prime still made him nervous. This planet was home to the Scrath, a reptilian species that had turned raiding into an art form. They were fast, they were brutal, and they never attacked during the day when the heat was strongest. They waited for the cool of night when they could move freely. His crew consisted of 42 humans, a mix of drivers, mechanics, guards, and medical personnel. They were not soldiers. They were ordinary people trying to make an honest living in a galaxy that often felt hostile to human existence. But Marcus had trained them well. Every member of his crew knew how to handle a weapon, and every vehicle in the convoy was equipped with defensive systems. Sarah Chung, his second-in-command, climbed up beside him. She was a former military engineer who had joined his crew after the colonial wars ended. Her expertise in defensive technology had saved their lives more than once. The convoy had formed a defensive circle with the vehicles, creating a makeshift fortress in the middle of the desert. Motion sensors had been placed in a wide perimeter around their position. Portable shield generators hummed quietly, ready to activate at a moment's notice. They had done everything right, but Marcus still felt uneasy. The Scrath had been watching them for 2 days. Marcus had caught glimpses of their scouts on the ridges of distant dunes, observing the convoy and reporting back to their war chief. The raiders were patient hunters who studied their prey before striking. They were waiting for the perfect moment. That moment came at exactly midnight. The first warning was a soft beep from the motion sensors, then another, then a dozen more. Marcus grabbed his radio and shouted the alarm. Within seconds, the entire convoy was awake and moving to defensive positions. Men and women grabbed weapons and took cover behind their vehicles. The shield generators powered up, creating a translucent barrier around the convoy. The Scrath emerged from the sand itself. They had buried themselves during the day, waiting beneath the surface for the attack signal. Hundreds of reptilian warriors rose from the dunes, their scaled bodies covered in tribal markings and their eyes gleaming with predatory hunger. They carried plasma rifles and curved blades made from the bones of their enemies. The first wave hit the shields like a storm. Plasma fire lit up the night, splashing against the barriers in bursts of blue and green light. The shields held, but Marcus knew they would not last forever. Shield generators consumed enormous amounts of power, and their batteries were limited. Marcus organized his defenders into 3 groups. The first group manned the heavy weapons mounted on the transport vehicles. These were pulse cannons, capable of tearing through Scrath armor at close range. The second group formed a firing line behind the vehicles, ready to engage any raiders that breached the perimeter. The third group stayed in reserve, ready to reinforce any position that came under heavy attack. The battle began in earnest when the Scrath war chief gave the order to charge. The raiders surged forward in a coordinated assault, hitting the convoy from 3 directions simultaneously. Their plasma fire intensified, and the shields began to flicker under the sustained barrage. Sarah shouted that the eastern shield generator was overheating. Marcus sent a team of mechanics to address the problem, while the defenders on that side increased their rate of fire. The pulse cannons roared, cutting down Scrath warriors by the dozen. But for every raider that fell, 2 more seemed to take their place. The humans fought with a determination that surprised even Marcus. These were not trained soldiers, but they refused to give ground. A young driver named Tommy Rodriguez manned the pulse cannon despite a wound in his shoulder, firing continuously until the barrel glowed red. An elderly mechanic named Elena Vasquez used a welding torch to repair a damaged shield generator while plasma bolts struck the ground around her. The Scrath had expected easy prey. Human merchants were supposed to be soft targets, civilians who would surrender or flee at the first sign of serious resistance. Instead, they found themselves facing a wall of fire and fury. The humans were fighting for their lives, and they were fighting hard. The eastern shield failed after 20 minutes of sustained bombardment. A gap opened in the defenses, and the Scrath poured through. Hand-to-hand combat erupted as raiders clashed with defenders in the narrow spaces between vehicles. The humans were physically weaker than the Scrath, but they made up for it with ingenuity and teamwork. Marcus led a counterattack personally, rallying a group of guards to push back the breach. He fired his rifle until it ran dry, then drew his sidearm and kept shooting. When that was empty, he grabbed a fallen Scrath blade and continued fighting. The raiders had never encountered humans who refused to die quietly. Sarah managed to restore the eastern shield by rerouting power from non-essential systems. The gap closed, trapping a group of Scrath inside the perimeter. The humans surrounded them and eliminated them with ruthless efficiency. No quarter was asked, and none was given. The battle raged for 3 hours. The Scrath launched wave after wave of attacks, testing different sections of the defense and probing for weaknesses. Each time, the humans adapted and responded. When the northern shield began to fail, they strengthened it with backup generators. When the western defenses ran low on ammunition, they redistributed supplies from other positions. They worked together like a single organism, anticipating problems and solving them before they became critical. The Scrath war chief watched the battle from a distant dune, his 4 eyes narrowing with confusion and frustration. His raiders had conquered dozens of convoys over the years. Alien merchants from 100 different species had fallen to their attacks, but these humans were different. They did not break. They did not flee. They stood their ground and fought back with a ferocity that bordered on madness. He ordered his elite guard to join the assault. These were his best warriors, veterans of countless raids who had never tasted defeat. They charged toward the convoy with weapons blazing, confident in their ability to turn the tide. They were wrong. The humans had been saving their heaviest weapons for exactly this moment. Hidden compartments in the transport vehicles opened, revealing missile launches that had been concealed beneath false panels. Marcus had purchased these weapons on the black market years ago, keeping them in reserve for an emergency exactly like this one. The missiles streaked through the night sky, trailing fire and smoke. They struck the Scrath elite guard with devastating precision, detonating in bursts of superheated plasma that vaporized everything within their blast radius. The elite warriors, who had never known fear, discovered it in their final moments. The remaining Scrath began to waver. Their morale, which had been unshakable moments ago, started to crumble. They had expected a quick victory and easy plunder. Instead, they had found a nightmare. The human convoy had become a death trap, and the sand around them was littered with the bodies of their fallen comrades. Marcus sensed the shift in momentum. He grabbed a flare gun and fired a brilliant red light into the sky. It was a signal that every member of his crew understood. They were going on the offensive. The shield generators powered down, and the humans surged out of their defensive positions. They attacked the Scrath with everything they had, driving them back across the dunes with a ferocity that defied explanation. The raiders who had always been the hunters suddenly found themselves being hunted. The Scrath war chief ordered a retreat. His warriors fled into the desert, disappearing over the dunes as quickly as they had appeared. The humans did not pursue them. They had won, and they knew better than to overextend themselves in unfamiliar territory. The sun rose over Zareth Prime 4 hours later, revealing the full extent of the battle. The sand was scarred with blast marks and littered with debris. More than 300 Scrath bodies lay around the convoy, a testament to the price they had paid for underestimating human merchants. Marcus surveyed his own casualties: 7 dead and 23 wounded. The losses were painful, but they could have been much worse. His people had faced impossible odds and emerged victorious. They had proven that humans were not easy prey. The convoy resumed its journey toward New Damascus that morning. The damaged vehicles had been repaired by Elena and her mechanics, and the wounded were being treated by the medical staff. Morale was high despite the exhaustion and grief. They had survived something that should have killed them all. Word of the battle spread quickly across Zareth Prime. The Scrath had ruled these deserts for centuries, taking what they wanted from anyone foolish enough to cross their territory. But the human merchants had broken that pattern. They had shown that even civilians could fight back when pushed hard enough. Other convoys began adopting similar defensive tactics. Human traders started working together, sharing information about raider movements and pooling resources for mutual protection. The Scrath found their hunting grounds becoming increasingly dangerous as their intended victims became more organized and better armed. Marcus Webb became something of a legend among the human colonies of the Outer Rim. He was invited to speak at trade conferences and security seminars, sharing the lessons he had learned during that long night in the desert. His message was always the same: humans were survivors. They had crawled out of the mud of Earth and spread across the galaxy through sheer determination and adaptability. No alien species should ever mistake human kindness for weakness. The convoy reached New Damascus 3 days after the battle. The medical supplies they carried saved hundreds of lives in the colony, which had been suffering from an outbreak of a local disease. The colonists welcomed the merchants as heroes, organizing a celebration that lasted well into the night. Marcus stood apart from the festivities, watching the stars appear in the evening sky. He thought about the 7 crew members who had not survived the journey. They had been ordinary people, merchants and mechanics and drivers who had never asked for glory. But they had found it anyway, defending their convoy against overwhelming odds. That was the human way, Marcus reflected. They did not seek out conflict, but they refused to surrender when it found them. They built, they traded, they explored. And when something threatened those endeavors, they fought back with every weapon at their disposal. The galaxy was a dangerous place, filled with species that viewed humanity as weak and expendable. Those species were learning, one battle at a time, just how wrong they were. The desert raiders of Zareth Prime never attacked another human convoy. The lesson of that midnight battle had been seared into their collective memory. Humans were not prey. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who refused to accept defeat, no matter how desperate the circumstances. And that made all the difference.